So let's talk politics. Were you surprised that he went ahead with the announcement on the 15th, even after what happened in the midterms? And why was that the right move?
Well, I mean, look, he wanted to announce beforehand. The reality is, he was out there saying he was going to run. I mean, the announcement was simply putting a period at the end of the sentence. To people who say, well, he should have waited, why? I mean, you could just say, well, it's not going to affect Georgia. Well, maybe it'll get people more motivated to turn out in Georgia on the Republican side. But the point is, you know, he's running based on his strategy and his timetable, not on the media's timetable, not on anyone else's. And the media that you saw in the aftermath of the elections, where they're focusing on blaming him for the election, look at some of the fingers pointing at him, and the rest of their hand is pointing back at them. I mean, Republicans were not united in this election. The Democrats were.
Well, let's talk about that cleavage. I agree with you. I agree with you, Paul. But let's take that point and unpack it a little bit. The party is not quiet around him like they used to be. They're getting yappy. They're putting shine on DeSantis. You have some donors backing away, but you have people talking about change, time to have somebody new. We're not used to that, and that is the environment or the atmosphere that Trump put himself into. What does that mean about his chances?
Well, look, I think what that means to show is that the Republicans have got a strong bench. They're not just a one-candidate party. I think the Democrats should fear that, not welcome that. We've had some major victors emerge over the course of the last 2 years, many of whom served in the Trump administration. So the fact that we've got a lot of people talking about president, many of them qualified to be president, I don't view as a bad thing. Now, what does that mean vis-a-vis Trump? Look, he beat 15 guys last time, so he's not bothered by numbers. And his message, and I listened to your opening comments about statistics. You and I both know we can use statistics to make any point we want. Contradictory points even. But the bottom line is
86% of statistics. 86% of statistics are made up on the spot. Continue.
Yeah, probably it's probably
You
right.
told me that like 25 years ago, by the way. But continue.
But the point is, Trump is going to be able to run on a record. And if you don't agree with his record, meaning the American people, they're going to have a chance to voice it again. He believes that the Biden administration and the problems that the Biden administration is facing, and many of which he believes the Biden administration caused, contrast very nicely with his record as president. And he thinks that will give him the best chance to win in 2024. And to the people who say, well, it's time to turn the page, that we need a leader that focuses on the future, not the past, I recognize that political strategy. I mean, I understand it. But the reality is we've got a guy who has a record who he can point to that can be the future. And that's what his campaign will be all about.
But isn't it about how he is?
What he said.
Hold on, Paul. I'll give you the record. He's got a record to run on. But does he have the ability to stop the things like, forget about the election was rigged. We saw how that played in the midterms. But the level of rancor, how he is, does he have the ability to change in a way to make, the centrist Republican, let alone the independent voter, not have to hold their nose to vote for him?
Well, that's going to be his test. I mean, that's going to be the basis on which he will succeed or not. You saw in his opening speech where everyone was expecting him to go with the same playbook. It wasn't the same playbook. He didn't get into 2020. He didn't get into a number of the issues that he's been talking about over the last couple of years. He focused on what we needed to do in the future, and he focused on the Biden record. So, I mean, we'll see. The campaigns have purpose, as you well know, and he who runs the best campaign generally does very well in an outcome. And we'll see what happens in this process. But clearly, in my personal opinion, he has he's earned the right to run again, and he has a record to run on. And to Republicans who want to replace him, I've never been afraid of primaries. Primaries usually strengthen the party. They didn't in 2022 because Republicans didn't rally behind themselves, and the leaders let down the party. But in 24, I think that the primaries will allow the party to vent, and in the process of doing that, it will allow whoever is the victor to emerge stronger, not weaker.
Hey, thank you for watching. please go to newsnationnow.com, newsnationnow.com, and you can find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button down below. Then you will get more of NewsNation's fact-driven coverage.